Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're wrapping up our journey through Wisdom Unveiled, really zoning in on the revolutionary thought of Mulla Sadra. And we're not just skimming the surface, we're aiming straight for the core of his philosophy, this incredibly radical idea, Harakat al-Jawhariyya, Transubstantial Motion. Our goal here is to figure out why Sadra insisted that reality is always fundamentally new, importantly, what that actually means for you, for how we live.
Absolutely. But before we really get into the weeds of these very deep concepts, I do need to offer in a necessary disclaimer. What we're discussing here is based on translations, interpretations, really, of conversations with some very respected Iranian philosophers, Dr. Dinani and Dr. Larijani. And because we're dealing with incredibly nuanced ideas, blending philosophy, mysticism, Arabic, Persian, it's complex. So we apologize up front if some subtleties, some of the finer points might get a bit lost in translation. It's genuinely difficult territory.
Understood. Okay, so let's dive in. Section 1. The principle of perpetual newness. Let's set the scene. For, over 1,000 years, philosophers following Aristotle, thinkers like Avicenna, they had this bedrock idea, the substance, the jawhar, the essence of a thing. It had to be static, unchanging.
Right. That was the foundation.
I mean, it makes intuitive sense, doesn't it? If the very essence of something is constantly morphing, how can you even know it? How can you define it? So change was okay for the surface stuff, the accidents like color, weight, temperature.
Exactly. The chairness of the chair didn't change even if you painted it red.
But Sadra, he just threw that whole model out.
Completely. He argued quite powerfully that you can't actually separate the substance from its accidents, its qualities. They're two sides of the same coin. And we see accidents changing constantly. Things grow, decay, shift. So if the accidents are always in flux and they're inseparable from the substance,
then the substance must be changing too.
Precisely. It has to be. Not moving through space necessarily, but undergoing a continuous internal transformation, becoming. So the you that started listening a minute ago, fundamentally not the same you now. You're in a constant process of becoming.
That's mind-boggling. He pulls the rug out from under the idea of a static self, a static world. What does that do to our ethics, our spiritual life?
Well, Sadra connects it directly to God's action. He points to the Quranic verse, every day he is in new manifestation. Or balhum philabsim in Kelkinjadid. If God's manifestation is perpetually new,
then creation has to be perpetually moving to receive it.
Exactly. It must be dynamic. And this leads straight to an ethical imperative. If the cosmos is always presenting something jaded, something new, then we must be ready for the new. It's a fundamental rejection of clinging to the old, what he called being a conservative coniparist. Stagnation, spiritual inertia becomes a kind of contradiction to the very nature of reality.
So a true believer's 2 days should never be identical.
Never. You have to be striving, seeking new understanding, becoming better, because reality itself is constantly unfolding, constantly offering more.
Okay, but doesn't this constant motion sound a bit chaotic? It reminds me a little bit of the Asherite theologians and their idea of kalak medem, continuous creation. Is Sadra just borrowing that?
That's a really crucial distinction to make because superficially they sound similar, but they're actually polar opposites in their implications. The Asherites did talk about constant creation, but they meant God annihilating and recreating the universe at every single instant, like zap, 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 gone new.
Which implies
Yeah.
gaps, interruptions.
Exactly. Constant breaks. It's like a choppy animation. Sadra's Jawhariyya, however, is about attaching motion. Edisol. It's a continuous connected flow. Think of a river or a smooth film reel.
Not a slideshow.
Precisely.
Huh.
For Sadra, movement is the connection. It's what holds reality together and allows for evolution, not constant destruction and restarting. It preserves identity through transformation.
Okay, that makes a huge difference. So motion is fundamental. Connection is key. But this leads us straight into section 2. The divine mechanism. Stability versus stillness. If everything's moving, what about stability? Does anything ever just stay put?
It's a great question, and the answer lies in carefully separating sukun, which means stillness or inertia.
Like being completely stopped.
Right. Versus thabat, which means stability, constancy, firmness. In Sadra's world of Jawhariyya, there's simply no room for sukun. Stillness implies a potential that's not yet actualized, a kind of passive waiting.
And in a universe defined by continuous becoming, It doesn't fit.
It doesn't. This is why, the mystics, the Irfan, they talked about their journey in terms of manzil, temporary resting places, places to pause, regroup, maybe catch your breath.
But only to prepare for the next stage of the journey,
Yep.
for greater acceleration.
Exactly. They never conceived of a maskan, a permanent dwelling, a final stop. The spiritual traveler is always moving. Stability, the bot, has to be understood differently. It's not about stopping.
So if things are constantly moving, transforming, actualizing potential, there must be a driving force, right? Something sustaining this whole dynamic process. This sounds like it brings God back into the picture very actively.
It absolutely does. This is where the concept of Mayat al-Qawmi comes in God's constant sustaining presence. It's linked to the verse, He is with you wherever you are. If creation is this dynamic flow from potential to act, God's role can't be like, winding up a clock and letting it run down. His sustaining action must also be dynamic. He's constantly involved, constantly providing the push for things to become.
Okay, but wait. If God is dynamically involved with a changing creation, doesn't that imply God himself changes? And that's a huge theological problem, isn't it? Perfection can't change.
That's the razor's edge Sadra walks, and his solution is brilliant. He says God is stable, that absolutely unchanging in his perfect essence. But he is absolutely not still sakin.
How can he be stable but not still?
Because stillness, sukun, implies that inertia, that waiting potential we talked about. That's impossible for pure actuality, for absolute perfection. God doesn't need to become anything more. His movement, his dynamism isn't self-change. It's the eternal, ceaseless manifestation, Dajjali, of his infinite perfections into creation. He's constantly pouring out his reality.
So God isn't changing. He's just constantly revealing more of his already infinite perfection, and creation is constantly moving to receive it.
That's the idea. Think about descriptions of paradise. It's not static bliss. It's often described as having joys and beauties that are constantly renewed. Why? Because they have to keep pace with the inexhaustible divine source.
Wow. Okay, so Jawhariyya is the philosophical engine, the rational proof that reality is this continuous transformation. Now, how does this purely logical necessity connect to the inner life, the spiritual path, the suluk? Does the fact that the universe moves mean my soul has to move?
It creates the framework for it, yes. And that brings us nicely into section 3, the mystical drive, loving motion, Harakat al-Hubbi. The mystics, perhaps long before Sadra formalized it philosophically, experienced this drive not just as logic, but as love. They felt a restless spiritual striving, an intense longing, hub, driven by the perception of divine beauty, Husn. They called this inner propulsion Harakat al-Hubbi, loving motion.
And the insight here is that this divine beauty isn't static either.
Exactly. It aligns perfectly with the Jawhariyya principle. Divine beauty itself is seen as perpetually renewing, increasing, expanding. They used words like rusasun. It's always becoming more intense, more captivating.
So if the object of your deepest love is infinitely beautiful and constantly getting more beautiful, you can't just sit back.
You can never rest. The lover has to keep moving, striving, reaching, just to try and keep pace with this endlessly unfolding beauty. The journey isn't about arriving at a fixed point. It's about participating in this dynamic unfolding.
That's a powerful image. And you mentioned the story of Joseph, and the Quran illustrates this, Asan al-Qasas.
Yes, it's considered the best of narratives, partly because it portrays different types, different dynamics of this Harakat al-Hubbi, this movement fueled by love. We can see sort of 3 levels.
Okay, let's break those down.
First, you have Jacob's love. His love for his lost son, Joseph, manifests as intense grief. Huzn, it's a consuming sorrow, a painful, churning internal movement caused by separation and loss. It's powerful, but it's reactive, born from absence.
Right, a movement driven by pain.
Second, there's Zulika's love for Joseph. This is raw passion, ishq, obsession. It's all-consuming desire, chaotic, restless, focused on possession, and initially, at least, physical beauty. It's incredibly turbulent, maybe even destructive if not channeled.
Very different from Jacob's grief, but still intense movement.
Definitely. But then third, you have Joseph's love itself. His love isn't directed towards a person in the same way or driven by loss or personal desire. It's directed towards God, towards the divine proof, Burhan al-Haq. It's characterized by stability, endurance, and a constant, steady striving towards the divine. It's not frantic like Zulika's, nor agonizing like Jacob's. It's a purposeful, evolutionary movement upward.
So Sadra is essentially saying, look, my philosophy of Jawhariyya shows you the universe is moving, constantly transforming towards perfection. And the mystical experience of Hubbi is the subjective, felt reality of that same movement. It's not just poetry. It's the necessary response of the soul to the dynamic nature of God and creation.
Exactly. He provides the rational scaffolding that makes the mystical drive understandable, even necessary. Which leads us to section 4, the synthesis and divine dialectic. This is where Sadra brings it all together. Jawhariyya is the cosmic mechanism, Hubbi is the spiritual engine.
And a key part of this synthesis you mentioned is this idea of opposition, tazad, a kind of divine dialectic. That sounds counterintuitive. Doesn't opposition cause problems?
For Sadra, it's the opposite. He explicitly stated, and this is quite profound, were it not for opposition, tazad, the continuous flow of grace, thoamal phase, from the generous source would not be maintained.
So opposition is necessary for grace to flow. How does that work?
He sees opposition as inherent in reality because it's inherent in the divine names and attributes themselves. God is al-awwal wa al-akhir, the first and the last, az-zahir wa al-batin, the apparent and the hidden. Opposites are united in him, and therefore he creates a universe with necessary contrasts. Heaven and hell, light and dark, angels and iblis, these opposing forces create the tension, the dynamism that drives the entire system forward. Without that tension, you'd have, well, stillness, sukun.
And stillness is impossible in this framework.
Right, so the opposition isn't a flaw, it's the engine.
And where does humanity fit into this grand play of opposites? This is where you said it gets really interesting.
Yes. Because, unlike angels, who are pure light, or Iblis, who represents pure deviation or darkness, humanity is uniquely created as a mixture, a concoction, majun, of both. We contain elements of the angelic and the satanic, of heaven and hell, of good and evil, potential and limitation.
We are the battleground.
We are the locus of the most intense form of this dialectic. This internal opposition makes our path inherently one of struggle, of constant movement. We are pulled in different directions. But crucially, Sadra emphasizes we're not left rudderless. We have the divine spark within, the intellect, the conscience, insan ala nafsi basira. Humanity is insightful over its own soul. We have the internal compass to navigate the struggle and move towards integration and ascent.
So the whole philosophical structure, the constant change, Jawhariyya, driven by divine manifestation, experienced as loving, striving, Hubbi, and played out through necessary opposition, tazad, it all points to the human condition as one of dynamic, purposeful becoming.
Precisely. The struggle isn't an obstacle to the path. The struggle is the path. It's the mechanism of transformation. And think about what this does to common debates, like tradition versus modernity. From a Sadrayan perspective, that conflict almost dissolves. If reality's very substance is perpetual newness, jaded, then there's no static tradition to rigidly adhere to or return to.
Because tradition itself was once new and was part of that flow.
Exactly. And there's no final modernity to arrive at either because the flow continues. There's only the constant imperative to engage with the ever-unfolding reality, drawing wisdom from the past, but always oriented towards the new potential.
It's a profoundly optimistic and dynamic worldview. It seems Sadra's greatest contribution was really building this bridge, providing the solid, rational proof for what mystics felt intuitively, that our identity isn't some fixed point, but this incredible, boundless, continuous becoming.
Beautifully put. And this concept of evolutionary becoming has major implications for what happens after death, too. Sadra's view of this motion is takamuli. It's an evolution within our own unique, substantial reality.
Which is why his system completely rejects the idea of tanasuk, or reincarnation, right?
Absolutely. Tanasuk assumes a separate soul kind of jumping between different pre-existing bodies, like changing clothes. For Sadra, the soul and its body, both physical and subtle, are inseparable aspects of one evolving substance. The soul actively shapes its embodiment as it moves.
So you don't get recycled, you continue to evolve along your unique trajectory.
Yes. You are becoming more you, not becoming someone else. The movement is forward, upward, and intensification and refinement of your own essential reality.
The implications are vast. It means the only constant is change, and our fundamental nature is movement.
Which leads to a final thought, perhaps something for you to ponder. If your deepest identity is this continuous motion towards an ever-renewing beauty and perfection, where in your life might you be clinging to stillness? Are you defining yourself by a static snapshot, a past achievement, a past failure, a job title, an old wound, instead of embracing the profound reality that you are right now in this very moment, infinite becoming? Are you living in the jaded, the newness that reality demands?
A powerful question to end on. You are not a fixed point, but the entire motion, Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the transformative world of Mulla Sadra. We hope you'll continue the journey with us next time.